I'm reading from Play the Man. We're on for chapter 7, and this one's entitled Love. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church, and gave himself for it, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word, that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. For no man yet hates his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, even as the Lord the church. For we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. This is a great mystery. But I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife even as himself, and the wife see that she reverence her husband. That passage was taken from Ephesians chapter 6, verses 25 to 33. And what a beautiful passage of scripture. This passage should make every woman feel special. The husband is being given explicit instructions to love and care for his wife as he cares for himself. Indeed, as Christ cares for the church. This is the passage the minister in Scotland spoke around when he told the groom that he had been given a bud to nurture and bring to maturity. I've really benefited from my relationship with Morris. Sometimes when he and I have been into prisons to minister, he's told the men that we have very different backgrounds. He tells them one of us came from a rough, violent, dysfunctional environment, and the other one had a completely different start in life. The men automatically think that he's the one with the rough upbringing and are stunned to find out that it was actually me. On numerous occasions, the men have looked right into my face and said in disbelief that I bear no scars from my past, whereas they do, and the scars are very obvious. I left home at the age of 16 and came under the pastor's influence. I was constantly round at his house, not only to do his secretarial work, but also because he had 2 daughters around my age who had befriended me. Morris was already married, so he lived away from home, but because he led the music group and took part in convening the church services, he had a great deal of input into my life and we became good friends. You could not imagine what my attitude was like years ago. Indeed, I can't believe it myself sometimes. But I know that I hated anything to do with authority. I'd left school, home, and was now being paid what I was due for working. If anyone tried to lord it over me, I told them in no uncertain terms what to do and where to go. I was arrogant and proud, and when I was persecuted by bosses for my attitude, I defended myself by saying that this was the result of me being a Christian. I don't know why the Barratts were there for me, because their lifestyle and family relationships were completely different to mine. If they had a disagreement, they'd sit down and talk it through rationally and come to some sensible conclusion. They worked together for the good of the family. They were so unbelievable. My own experience had been so different, and I would often quietly sit amongst them, waiting for them to forget I was there so that they would act normal and not put on an act for my benefit. But this was them. They really were being normal. I remember during one group rehearsal when things weren't going well and I was being corrected about something. Being the only female among 4 or 5 males, I felt humiliated and shown up. I was so infuriated that after I'd said some choice things, I ran out of the church and headed home. Nobody was going to speak to me like that, especially someone who wasn't my boss. It was late at night, but I managed to catch a bus. As I disembarked at my destination and began to walk towards my apartment, I could see Morris's outline ahead of me. Immediately, I panicked, turned tail, and ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction. He ran after me, and I was terrified. I'd said some awful things. I'd stormed out of the church in a fit of temper before the rehearsal had ended, and here he was, waiting to sort me out. To make matters worse, Maurice tripped over something on the pavement and went sprawling across the floor. I nearly freaked out with fear. What would he do now? Especially as I had caused him to embarrass and maybe hurt himself. I ran into the front garden and cowered behind a large rose bush, hoping that Maurice hadn't seen where I'd gone. But he had, and he followed me. As he bent over me, I cried out, "Don't hit me, don't hit me," and covered my head with my arms. Maurice was holding back tears as he asked in a choked voice, "What have your family done to you?" He held me as I sobbed. I was so frightened, yet so relieved that he hadn't battered me. He didn't shout at me, tell me off or incriminate me. He just soothed and coaxed me, speaking very softly and gently until I'd calmed down and regained a little confidence. You know, people who cause problems have problems. And oh boy, I had massive problems. But the tenderness, love and patience which Maurice has exercised towards me over the years has paid off with dividends, so that now people think it's him who's had the family problems and not me. Love shows itself in many forms, and Maurice has not always been gentle with me. There was one occasion, before we were married, which is etched indelibly on my memory. I was in my apartment preparing to go out as I'd made arrangements to meet somebody. Maurice arrived at my door and wanted to talk with me. I knew he would definitely not approve of what I had proposed to do. To be honest, neither would any Christian for that matter. So I didn't say a word about where I was going or who I would be with, and just carried on getting ready to go out whilst he talked with me. I became anxious as the minutes ticked away and did my best to get rid of him, but he wouldn't go. Something was disturbing his spirit, and he knew inside himself that it was related to what I was about to do. In the end, I got very blunt and told him to get out, but he wouldn't, and he even stood in front of the door to block my exit. I was trapped, and something really evil rose up inside of me. I became hysterical, ranting and raving, shouting and screaming, and all the time an inner voice was telling me to just give in to what I was feeling. I knew it was the devil talking to me, and I could feel myself relaxing and giving way to his voice. Just give way to what you feel, the voice said. And I knew that if I did, I would be given permission of my own free will to allow Satan to take control of my life. And I could actually feel myself slipping into it. Suddenly, I felt an almighty slap across my face. Maurice had actually hit me really hard. The slap shocked me back to my senses, and the reality of what had almost happened astounded me. I was stunned. I stared at Maurice, and looking right into his eyes, I said, "Thank you." And now it was his turn to be shocked, as I told him what I'd just experienced. I'd almost given the devil a legal right into my life, and who knows where that would have led. Thank God, Maurice loved and cared for me enough to physically force me back to sanity. This is a hard lesson to learn, but I found that love does what is best for a person, not necessarily what the person likes. I well remember an incident when Maurice and I had been married only a couple of months. I was used to running my own life and doing anything I wanted, as I'd lived alone for a number of years. But suddenly, Maurice wanted to know where I was all the time. It seemed ridiculous. What was he expecting me to be up to? I knew I wasn't to be trusted, but I hadn't wanted him to go this far. This was possessiveness. He worked from home, which made matters worse, for I felt he was always spying on me. And now he expected me to go running upstairs to his office every time I needed to nip out of the house, just so that he knew where I was. Obviously, I rebelled against this. It made me feel claustrophobic. At 37 years of age, I went out without telling him. And the next time he saw me, he said he wanted me in his office with an apology. Man, that was more than I could handle. God had got me into this fix. He was the one who told me to get married, but I just couldn't cope. I sat down at my kitchen table and pondered what I would do. Is this really what I wanted for the next 50 years? Someone breathing down my neck all the time, demanding that I be there at his every beck and call, wanting to know my every movement. It was then that I realised I wasn't cut out for all this at all. And so I wrote a letter to the effect that I was really sorry for the way things had turned out, but I now knew that marriage wasn't for me. I loved him very dearly and respected him tremendously, but I'm afraid I just couldn't fit into his confines of married life. I was leaving. This wasn't an empty threat. I wasn't bluffing. I really meant what I wrote, and I'd worked out in my mind what I would do. I could easily get a temporary job with the Bureau again and find somewhere to live. It was just a shame that this would mean 2 failed marriages for Morris instead of 1, and I really did regret doing this to him. I took the letter upstairs to his office, gave it to him, and without saying a word, came back down again. It didn't take him long to read the letter, and he flew downstairs. He was grinning from ear to ear, which I thought rather strange. He flung his arms round me and said he was sorry, which again I thought rather strange. He then said he realised he was putting me under an unnecessary burden and would wait until I'd had time to adjust. And by the way, I've been thinking about things and I've decided to get you your own car. I could have fainted. What did he say? Well, true to his word, he gave me a car and the keys, and with these came the sense of freedom which my heart craved. But the funny thing was that this made me want to be a better wife. The more confidence he placed in me, the more I responded and complied with his wishes. Over these past few years, since Morris has been preaching from the Sermon on the Mount, he's tried to adopt a more godly attitude towards myself and the children. At one time, he believed it was right to be a strict disciplinarian, but now he's come to the conclusion that he's never been treated in that way by God. Like a tender father, God has given Morris numerous chances to change. When Morris's attitude has been humble, God has been full of mercy and love. And if ever he became arrogant and defensive, God would deal very swiftly and heavily with him, for this is rebellion. And rebellion in God's eyes is as the sin of witchcraft. I didn't know how to behave in a family environment, but Morris has shown me another side to it. And over the years, his attitudes and qualities have rubbed off on me. It has required a great amount of time and effort from him, but he has been greatly rewarded in seeing me change. I know I've not been the easiest person in the world to handle, understatement, and it hasn't been easy for him. But I'll be eternally grateful that Morris loved me enough to adapt in many areas to become a better man and husband.